Eli Turner stepped deeper into the woods, moving past the cracked bark of ancient pines, their trunks rising like silent sentinels on either side of the narrow trail. Ruckus pressed ahead, nose low to the forest floor, sniffing carefully through moss and dead leaves as though tracking a scent invisible to human senses. The morning air was thick and cold, with mist hanging low in the hollows, and he could feel tiny droplets of dew collecting on his jacket as pale dawn light filtered dimly through. The dense canopy, he remembered how he and Ruckus had left the cabin early that morning, just as the sky began to faintly brighten in pale gray hues. They had done this walk countless times before, past broken stone outcroppings and through patches of thorny underbrush, always returning home before the sun climbed too high. But today there was that pause. Ruckus made a few steps behind when the trail curved sharply and the woods grew denser, a deep knot of trees blocking the horizons. Eli's heart raced as he strained his ears, listening to the forest's whispers, the rustling of wings, unseen birds flitting between branches, the soft scratching of small claws in leaf litter, the sigh of wind through needles above. All of it sounded normal. Until it wasn't until there was a silence so complete you could almost hear blood pulsing in your ears. He nudged forward, pushing aside drooping branches. The underbrush was tangled vines and old brambles whipping at his arms, sapping his pace. Then Ruckus halted again, his body rigid, his hackles rising, his posture stiffened like a guard on alert. He emitted a low rumble deep in his throat and moved ahead a few more paces, with tail high and fur bristling. Eli's throat tightened, wondering what his dog sensed, what unseen danger lay ahead. He whispered softly for Ruckus to wait, but the dog gave only that low growl and pressed forward as though compelled. Eli followed slowly, each step cautious as he plunged through shrubs and ferns. The forest floor damp underfoot, softer than expected as though soaked overnight. The scent around him shifted, becoming faintly sweet with decay, and something else, something strange, pungent and wild, but he couldn't identify it. He stopped for a moment to listen. He thought he heard a soft cry, distant and muffled like an infant animal in distress. He froze mid-stride, straining to locate the source. The cry came again, feeble and trembling, and he felt a chill move through him. He knelt and pressed a hand flat on the ground, feeling the damp earth cold beneath his palm. He closed his eyes and inhaled deep, the cool air filling his lungs. He detected the faintest whiff of fur and musk, and something raw that no forest had offered before. Rose slowly scanning the undergrowth in all directions. The trees seemed to lean inward, watching him. He glanced at Ruckus, whose ears were pinned forward, his body taut. And then he saw it. A patch of movement in a small clearing ahead just beyond. A fallen log cloaked in shadow. He could see pale shapes writhing in the dim light, and his breath caught in his chest. He advanced the final few steps, crunching brittle leaves beneath his bots. And when he crested the log, the scene unfolded before him. 3 tiny forms huddled together, their fur mottled with spots faintly visible in the gloom. Their eyes were half open, glazed with fear and confusion. Their bellies looked scrawny, their ears drooping. They scratched weakly at the earth, and they trembled, as though every breeze threatened to send them into oblivion. Eli's heart pounded so loud he could almost hear it in his ears. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. He had never believed he would find anything like this. Something so vulnerable and forsaken. He stared at the kittens, their markings and size, telling him they were not kittens of domestic cats, but wild creatures born in these woods. He looked at Ruckus, whose rigid frame had relaxed now, but whose eyes remained fixed on the tiny animals. He crouched low at the edge of the clearing, not daring to make sudden moves. For a moment there was silence, only the soft sound of a twig snapping somewhere deeper in the undergrowth and the weak wheeze of the kittens. As they struggled to draw breath, the clearing seemed too still, the forest too large and indifferent. But he felt the weight of life in his palms, the urgency humming in his veins. He wanted to reach out, cradle them close, wrap them in warmth, but he hesitated. Every fiber of survival in the wild told him that interfering could invite danger. The woods hid predators and watchers, wild mothers returning seeking lost young, or worse, unknown creatures drawn by disturbance. But he could not stand idle. He brushed aside a branch and stretched out one hand, trembling toward the nearest kitten. It squeaked weakly, a plaintive high cry that cracked his heart. He paused his fingers mere inches from the fur, then withdrew, frozen at the awful possibility that the mother or some guardian creature might appear at any moment, and he would be caught in the act. He swallowed hard, fighting dizziness from the cold, damp air. He glanced over his shoulder into the deeper shadows behind him, hearing that soft crack again like a boot on broken stick, and felt as though he were being observed by unseen eyes. He turned his gaze back to the kittens and saw one of them stir clumsily, pushing itself forward on weak limbs as though urging him to help Ruckus. Stepped beside him, suddenly placing a body between Eli and the fallen forms, the dog's gaze sweeping the woods around them. The gesture startled him, and he swallowed his fear. He murmured to Ruckus in low voice, urging calm while his mind raced, trying to calculate every risk, what species mother might return, what local wildlife might attack, what authorities might accuse him of illegal interference. Yet compassion overwhelmed him, and he clenched his jaw. He needed to act before the moment passed. He unzipped the front of his pack, zip tearing slightly as he withdrew a wool scarf he always carried. He folded it loosely and edged forward, guiding Ruckus to stand back. He reached toward the kittens again, this time more steadily, and scooped up the smallest one, pressing it gently into the folds of cloth. The stripped softness of its belly pressed faintly against his fingers, and he felt a faint, feeble heartbeat. His chest hammered, but he forced himself to stay steady, his breath shallow and careful. He cradled the kitten near his chest, pressing it close to his body, hoping his warmth might ease the chill that stiffened its limbs. He turned to lift the second kitten, but at that moment the forest seemed to inhale, and a twig snapped, loud right behind him, as though someone had stepped there a mere heartbeat. He froze, mid-motion, heart in his throat. His wrist stiffened, motionless. The world narrowed into a tunnel, the dim light of the clearing, the trembling forms in his arms. The looming shapes of trees beyond his ears strained for sound. The kitten in his scarf emitted a forlorn mewl that cut through the hush. He dared not look over his shoulder. Yet he felt compelled. His pulse roared in his ears, and he forced his head around sideways, slow as a waking predator. His eyes scanned the gloom between trunks just beyond the clearing, where shadows moved, not quite shaped but shifting, as though some great form lurked just out of sight. He gasped inwardly, not daring to exhale too loudly. His vision caught a flash of tawny hide. Something big and silent crouching behind bracken, a pair of eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. The creature, though distant, was clearly watching him and his stolen kittens. Its shape was muscular, formidable, and when it lunged, it did not dash into the clearing, but moved silently forward between trees toward his position. Ruckus barked, then roared a deep warning in the hush of the forest, his body bracing to intercept the hidden threat. Eli spun, clutching the kitten to his chest, scanning for escape routes. The fallen log lay behind him, the trail back to the cabin far ahead, but between them lay twisted undergrowth and thick brush. He dared not shout lest he draw further attention. Yet he had to act. He bent low, pressing closer to the kittens, covering them with his body as a shield, moving backward. One careful footstep, then another. He could feel the ground sloping downward, gentle toward a small ravine beyond the clearing. The creature moved softly as fog draped the forest floor, its presence a silent storm gathering strength behind him. Ruckus growled again, stepping protectively in front of the other kittens, half visible in the clearing as though daring the beast to approach. Eli's mind raced, and he made a decision. He could not carry all three at once, the weight would slow him too much. He needed to secure a path out, and then return for the others. But the beast might strike on his first move. He glanced up at a mossy log fallen across the ravine. Perhaps he could use it as a bridge or barrier. He shifted forward inch by inch, the kitten in his arms pressed tight to his chest, and his eyes locked on the forest gloom between trunks. He felt dread coiling in his belly, yet determination pushed him onward. He would not leave them there. Then he heard a deep, low growl matching the one in his chest, an exhalation of threat that echoed through the trees from the direction of the beast. The creature had moved closer, and now something touched his awareness that it was not simply a wild cat, but something else, something larger and hungrier. Eli's mind split between fear and resolve. He steadied the trembling kitten, held him firmer, and edged backward. Toward the broken log, his boot slipping once on damp moss. He glanced at Ruckus, whose fur bristled and who glared at the shadows as though promising to fight. He reached the log with one foot on it. His body tense, then planted his other foot, hoping. To cross it to the safer side, he glanced back, the form of the creature no longer fully hidden, now stepping from behind. A knot of ferns, a pelt of tawny fur mottled with darkness. Muscles rippling in the dim forest light, he hesitated mid-step. The log wobbled beneath him, his balance fragile, and behind him the forest pressed silent and alive. Something about that creature's eyes told him it had been watching for much longer than he had known. By the time he regained composure, he heard another snap of branch to his side, and the beast gave a low grunt of warning. He had nowhere to turn, but ahead lay the log bridge, and beyond it the thicker forest toward his cabin somewhere beyond that realm. He pushed forward, crossing carefully the log, holding the kitten close. Ruckus followed, hitting the log with firm paws as though reinforcing it with his weight. But the creature did not pursue openly. It paused at the edge of the clearing, its form massive, now visible a mountain of muscle and sinew, and its head low. It watched them cross as though measuring their worth. The clearing fell silent except for the kitten's weak cry and the low shiver of wind through branches. Once across, Eli refused to look back. He pressed forward into deeper forest, wrapping the kitten tighter in the scarf, his every step alert for further danger. Behind him, he thought he heard it, moving deeper through the trees, stalking along the margin of the clearing, but not giving chase, just observing as though guarding its domain. He did not slow until the kitten's heartbeat in his chest steadied, and Ruckus trotted close his ears, swiveling at every sound. The forest gradually thinned and mossy rocks gave way to loose earth, and then at last he could see the faint glimmer of the trail ahead, where sunlight would soon reach. Eli's lungs burned, he shook with adrenaline, yet he carried the kitten safe for now, but his mind churned with questions. Did the beast retreat? Did it follow? Did he save them all? Or would the forest reclaim what he had taken? He would soon know as he turned to step deeper into the march toward his cabin when a faint cry behind him echoed through the trees, leaving him frozen in place. The wind pressed through the trees in cold waves as Eli stepped over moss-covered roots deeper into the forest, his breath visible now in pale bursts as the temperature dropped steadily. Ruckus remained close to his side, ears swiveling at each new sound, every broken twig and distant rustle setting the dog on edge. The kitten pressed to Eli's chest, barely moved, now so light it felt like it might vanish at any moment, like mist slipping through fingers. The path ahead twisted sharply around a rise in the ground, and as Eli stepped around it, he slowed to a stop and crouched again, hiding behind a downed tree with bark peeling like old parchment. He turned to look back the clearing, now mostly hidden behind thick underbrush, but he could still hear faint sounds, the kind that made his stomach tighten and jaw clench. Something was moving through the woods behind him. Not rushing, but slow and steady, like it knew it had time, as though it was tracking, not chasing, watching, not charging. And that was worse because it meant whatever it was had no fear and no need for urgency. Ruckus growled low just once, a deep warning that barely vibrated. In the air, Eli reached down and laid the kitten gently into his open backpack, lining the inside with the scarf to keep it warm, then zipped it partly closed enough to keep it safe, but not crushed. He wiped his damp hands on his jeans and reached. Down to touch the earth again, it was still cold, still wet, the moisture soaking through his knees as he knelt. But there were no fresh tracks, no broken branches, only the sounds and the sense of something unseen, always just beyond the edge of sight. Rosen began to move again, back toward the spot where the other two kittens had been left, his breath shortening with each step, his mind racing with questions he could not answer. Where was the mother bobcat? Why were they abandoned? Was the creature he had seen earlier a rival, a predator, or something worse? Something displaced and starving. The trail narrowed here, barely visible under fallen leaves, and Eli moved quickly but carefully, crouching and moving from tree to tree, his hands brushing. Against rough bark, his ears tuned to every sound. The forest no longer felt familiar. It felt alive in a way that was foreign and old, as if the woods had woken up and begun watching. When he finally reached the clearing again, he saw that the other two kittens had shifted their positions, one now lying on its side, twitching in its sleep, or perhaps in pain. The other was sitting up weakly, staring directly at him with cloudy blue eyes, as though it had been waiting for him to return. Ruckus walked slowly into the clearing and sat beside the kittens. Not barking now, only watching, alertly moved forward slowly, voice low and soothing, whispering the way he might to a frightened child, and he crouched to pick up the second kitten, wrapping it in the tail of his flannel shirt, tying the sleeves around his chest to form a sling. He barely had time to lift the third before a sound stopped him, dead in his tracks. A deep, slow exhale came from the edge of the trees, followed by a shuffle of earth and the crack of wood under something large, something heavy. The sound was not close, not yet, but closer than before. It came from a different direction than last time, and that meant it was circling, perhaps calculating paths of escape or cutting. Off retreat, Eli's hands trembled slightly as he held the final kitten to his chest, his arms wrapped tightly around it, not just to keep it from falling, but to protect it from the thing moving just out of view. He turned slowly, eyes sweeping the woods, but he could see nothing, and that was almost worse because he could feel it watching from somewhere. Just beyond, Ruckus turned two ears pinned back and body tense, and Eli could tell the dog wanted to growl again, but was holding it back, choosing silence, choosing survival. He began backing away again toward the path, toward the cabin, toward safety, and each step felt like dragging his soul through quicksand, heavy and slow and uncertain. A sudden gust of wind ripped through the trees overhead, showering the forest floor with brittle leaves that spun in wild patterns around them, like the woods were warning them that time was running out. The wind carried a new scent too sharp and coppery, something that did not belong in autumn woods. Something metallic and wet and full of violence. Eli moved faster now, gripping both kittens tightly as he stepped over a fallen log, nearly slipping on a patch of slick moss. Ruckus circled behind him, never turning his back to the woods, moving in, reversed like a soldier guarding retreat. Eli dared one glance back and saw again the glint of eyes deep in the brush, low to the ground, unmoving and unblinking. He turned forward and broke into a full run, crashing through the woods, no longer caring about silence or stealth, now only focused on distance. Every branch he shoved aside slapped him like the forest itself wanted to hold him back, trip him, delay him long enough for something ancient to catch up. The kitten in his shirt whimpered, and the one in his arm barely moved. Ruckus bounded ahead, barking now loud and sharp, his voice echoing through the trees. And Eli knew that sound would carry far, but he hoped that somewhere in that sound there was warning, and not just fear. He spotted the faint outline of the old trail again, the one that curved back toward the creek and the cabin beyond, and he pushed himself harder. Lungs burning, legs aching, heart pounding so fast it felt like it would burst. The air seemed colder, now sharper, as if the trees themselves leaned closer. Narrowing the path behind him, he heard the rustle again, louder this time, faster, and closing in, but still not rushing, still not charging, always watching, always waiting. That was what chilled him most, the patience of it, the deliberate stalking, not for hunger, not for defense, but for possession, for something unseen and ancient in the quiet bones of the forest. Eli crashed through the last thicket and saw the glint of water ahead, the creek that curved. Just before the rise to the cabin, his sanctuary barely visible through the trees, and still standing where it had always stood, weathered and silent. He crossed the creek in one long stride, boots soaking through with icy water, and scrambled up the hill, breathing hard. Ruckus darted ahead, turned and barked again, eyes fixed on the woods behind them, ears raised like a flag of warning at the cabin porch. Eli collapsed onto one knee, unzipping his pack and checking the first kitten, then the second. Then the one wrapped in his shirt, all three breathing faintly but alive and warm, pressed to his body, and he exhaled hard. But before he could rise, before he could breathe a true breath of relief, a sound echoed from the edge of the trees. Not a growl, this time, but something else, a low chuff of air like laughter or breath. Not from an animal, but from something pretending to be one. And Eli stood slowly turning toward the sound as the shadows thickened at the tree line. And then he saw it again, fully this time. It had followed him all the way home. Eli did not move. His breath caught in his throat. eyes locked on the shadow at the edge of the woods, where the creature now stood half obscured by low branches, but fully visible enough to erase any hope that it had been a figment of panic and forest tricks. It was massive shoulders, hunched muscles coiled beneath a hide that shimmered with damp earth and old scars, its eyes burning faint yellow like fading embers in a dying fire. Ruckus stood firm between Eli and the woods, his stance rigid, tail stiff head, lowered ready to protect even as the hairs along his back rose like warning flags, and his growl came low and steady like distant thunder rumbling beneath the skin of the earth. Eli kept one hand on the kittens, pressing them close, feeling their fragile warmth, reminding himself why he could not back down, even though every nerve in his body screamed to flee.